It's time to explore the world according to Glenn. I'm Kevin Jacobsen. Glenn Close is my favorite actress, and this show is all about exploring the career of one of the finest actors of her generation. Each episode, I'll be joined by a guest as we dive into one of Glenn's movies, TV shows, or stage productions, going chronologically through her career, discussing her performance, and assessing the project itself. And today, we are talking Glenn's first box office hit as a leading actress, the 1985 courtroom thriller Jagged Edge.
Eight-time nominee Glenn Close, motherfuckers.
My guest today, I am so happy I get to podcast with again. He joined me on my other show, and the runner-up is, to discuss the 1990 Best Actress race. We talked Misery, we talked The Grifters, Pretty Woman, all kinds of good stuff. Pop culture writer with bylines at Vulture, The Daily Beast, Awards Watch, and Queerty. Welcome to the show, Eddie Mouradian.
Thank you, Kevin. I'm so glad to be back and talking about one of my other favorite topics, 1980s courtroom dramas.
Yes, I'm so thrilled that you're here to break down one of the ultimate ones, I think, of this decade. A lot to unpack with this one. But before we talk Jagged Edge, would love to know your relationship with Glenn Close overall. If you remember when you first saw her, when you took notice, and if you have a favorite performance of hers.
Sure. Well, as I said last time I was on your podcast, I am famously 150 years old. So in the 80s, I do remember, as I was sort of becoming a movie and pop culture person, I do remember kind of like this Meryl versus Glenn Close thing. And I think in my, 7, 8-year-old brain, I remember thinking that like they must have been in competition with each other. Like these are the two women, and I'm sure that they were in some sense. And I remember at, I think it was like the Kennedy Center honors or something like that, where Meryl was being honored, seeing Glenn Close in the audience, and I was like, huh, they're friends. That's so nice. But like I think even as a kid, if you were somewhat conscious, you like remember Fatal Attraction as like a thing. I certainly didn't see it until well into my teen years, but like the jokes about it and like the prevalence in pop culture and certainly the bunny was alive and well because then in the 80s and 90s when movies had this long tail of going from being like a massive hit on screen, and maybe when that happened and I was 6, I wasn't aware of it. But then after living on HBO and then living on video for years and years and years, by the time, say, Sleepless in Seattle was around and Tom Hanks was making a joke about Fatal Attraction, I was very well aware of it. So I think that that's certainly my entry point to Glenn. That and probably a little bit of Dangerous Liaisons. I feel like that was a really good VHS tape we had. It was like Dangerous Liaisons and I think like Tequila Sunrise. So it was a Michelle Pfeiffer tape, which is the best.
I love that.
Of course, Fatal Attraction is,
Yeah.
one of the greatest. I'm not going to be ignored, Dan, is something me and my friends say all the time when one of us is acting crazy. Dangerous Liaisons, I feel like actually I have such a deeper appreciation now than I did. It's really risen to the top of probably one of my favorite of her performances, but just sort of like that movie in general, so delicious in a way that I didn't appreciate probably until my 30s. But I think my low-key favorite Glenn Close performance is in 1994, The Paper, the Ron Howard movie. I was and I think I was more like Marissa Tomei-pilled. My dad and I saw that movie in theater, and my cousin Vinny in theaters, sort of on a whim, out of nowhere. And so I was like, I think, deeply in love with Marissa Tomei. And I remember I've read the paper, I do not think is based on a novel, but I read one of those novelization tie-ins about it. That's how
Hmm.
deeply into that movie coming out at 13 years
You
old.
were paper
Yeah,
pilled.
I was
You were paper
I
pilled.
was the paper pilled like every other 13-year-old boy in America. I was dying to see Ron Howard's The Paper. Um,
Hmm.
and I but I came away from it with like loving Glenn Close in that movie. You know, the fist fight with
Yes.
Michael Keaton. She was like a ball buster, but she was sort of like even then sympathetic, and that performance has only grown for me over time, and that movie also.
Amazing. Yes. Very excited to cover all of those movies very soon on the show. She is really entering her peak
Yeah,
era at the moment.
you've got a lot in front of you that's pretty great.
Yes, this window of Fatal Attraction to 101 Dalmatians is going to be, hit after hit.
Yeah.
But yes, very excited for the paper as well. I love the power suit that she has in that with the glasses. It's such a great look.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Anyway, yes. Speaking of power suits, let us talk about Jagged Edge. So, yes, Glenn was really in the thick of it, going back and forth between film, TV, and theater, really kind of thriving. She had done The Real Thing on Broadway in 1984, for which she won a Tony, and she pursued leading roles from there, which we talked about last week with Maxie, and then here with Jagged Edge. So this is a legal thriller with kind of hints of erotic thriller too, as well. And Jane Fonda was originally sought to play this role that Glenn would eventually play, but Jane had several notes for the script that was written by Joe Esterhaas, and the studio, Columbia, actually sided with Esterhaas in this case. So then Esterhaas and the director, Richard Marquand, offered the role to Glenn directly, and she accepted. But there was some major drama behind the scenes because the producer, Martin Ransohoff, was incensed that Glenn was cast and said some really nasty things about her. He said that she was a matron in training and that she was unattractive and that he didn't want to fuck her. His comments ultimately did get back to Glenn, who apparently wanted him gone whenever she was filming, just not comfortable with his presence. So a little tense behind the scenes, and maybe I'll mention a little more about that as we get into the discussion. But yeah, it's important to know that that's kind of going on because it will also lead a bit into her next role as well in how she was cast in Fatal Attraction. So, with that said, Jagged Edge is a legal thriller that begins with the shocking murder of a San Francisco socialite, Paige Forrester, by a masked intruder. So pretty quickly, the district attorney, Krasny, played by Peter Coyote, puts together a case with Paige's husband, Jack Forrester, played by Jeff Bridges, as the main suspect. So Jack hires Teddy Barnes, played by Glenn. She's an attorney who left the district attorney's office after a rather mysterious incident and has since stopped practicing criminal law, but agrees to help Jack, who is continuing to insist he didn't do it. So the case goes to trial, and as they're battling it out in court, Teddy finds herself increasingly attracted to Jack, and he also woos her, and they start hooking up, which naturally complicates things. So yes, let's get right into it. This is a fascinating film that I think we'll have a lot to talk about with. But yeah, tell me your relationship with Jagged Edge and how it fits into this sort of subgenre and Glenn's performance. What do you think?
I think that on another podcast, this had Oscar Buzz, they say this a lot, and Blank Check, they say this a lot in other podcasts, that this movie to me existed for so long as a movie poster, as like a video box
Yes.
screen.
Incredible poster.
And and for the longest time, I think I confused it with another Jeff Bridges erotic thriller from this time, Against All Odds. And I've never seen that movie, and I don't know if they have anything to do with each other, but they're just so evocative for me of like the poster is the poster or the VHS box, the first thing I think about. I love both 80s erotic thrillers and courtroom thrillers.
Mhm.
I hate to sound, I said this actually last time we podcasted together, but I'm going to sound like the oldest millennial ever, but God, they just don't make them like this anymore. And
They sure don't.
but spoiler alert, burying the lead, this is not a very good movie. And yet I would give anything to get, 6 of these a year, sort of like B level movies with A level talent in just like a courtroom thriller that is doesn't really make a ton of sense at the end of it. Um, I have seen this movie before. It didn't hold up for me as much this time around. I think because I realized, I mean, this movie hates women, and Joe Esterhaus himself, the his fingerprints are all over it. The opening scene is so brutal. The
Lurid.
sort of
Yes.
the but like mean spirited, and the movie can't is not working on that level. And it's interesting that you said Jane Fonda was originally in this role. I don't think Glenn is miscast, but it feels a little bit like a Jane Fonda role of the time. I don't know. I'm very mixed on it. I remember enjoying it so much more than I did this time around. What did you
Hmm.
think?
Interesting. I mean, I still have some kind of affection for it, even while acknowledging that there are flaws, to put it nicely. I think what he would do, like what Joe Esterhaus would do later with Basic Instinct, is more effective for me. But I do find it kind of weirdly enjoyable on the same level. And Glenn is a big part of that for me. I do think it is worth acknowledging that this is a rather momentous occasion of this being her first big role as a lawyer many
Hmm.
years before Damages.
Right.
And she's also about to return to that field again with All's Fair, the new Ryan Murphy show, which I'm excited for, even though the lead is Kim Kardashian. But anyway,
Tough to see. Tough to see
yeah,
Glenn flanking him.
yeah, tough to see Kim dead center,
Yeah. And
Glenn in the
look,
background. Yeah,
I'm always rooting for a nice Armenian girl as I am,
sure.
as an Armenian myself. And I don't even feel a type of way about Kim Kardashian. And certainly, again, we don't want this to be a 4 hour podcast, so can't go into the full Kardashian of it all.
Yes.
But I don't
Mm-hmm.
begrudge her that, I guess. It's just so odd to see these luminaries flanking her, and it hurts my heart.
Yeah, a little bit. So we'll put a pin in that and see how that goes. But uh, I think what I really respond to here is just seeing her really kind of locking into her screen persona that she would sort of maintain moving forward a lot with these kind of tough, sometimes career women, often, defying expectations from what's expected of her as a woman and going toe to toe with men and using her smarts, which I think is, you know, questionable at times, some of the things she
Yeah,
she does in the
I'd
film.
like to come
But
back to that.
yes, yes, but like on paper, smart businesswoman, all those things. I think she really inhabits all of that well, and there's an intelligence in just the way that she commands the screen that really is like commanding respect and attention, and like a slight, like there's something going on behind the eyes that she's
Hmm.
always up to that I find really engaging. But yeah, I think she's very compelling here,
Yeah,
personally.
I mean, to be clear, I think this movie is incredibly watchable.
Yes.
It has this like warm blanket feel of an HBO movie from the 80s and 90s that on any random day you could put it on and catch the last third or the first third or the middle. And it's very
Mm-hmm.
evocative of that time, in a very pleasant way. Something you said that really struck me this time. So I want to all of my, I guess, criticisms or conversation about that is under the guise of like, oh, but like this movie is, again, so watchable and comforting in a way, even if it's a little bit nasty in other ways. But I I really, what you had said before about Glenn is such a smart performer, and by that I mean she portrays an intelligent person. It's, I think there are a couple of times where she's played ditzy or whatever, and maybe like Cookie's Fortune, or where she even in
Mm.
that movie is sort of revealed to be slyer than everyone thinks. But it's hard to make her not smart. And I think that the script fails her a little bit too much around making her supremely competent, talented lawyer be making some really crazy decisions. From the I think we've been taught by various legal dramas and movies and things like Primal Fear, that maybe weren't as prevalent in the mid 80s, of like this idea that the lawyer saying, I don't care if you did it or not, right, like that's
Yeah.
so much of the baseline of so many of these legal thrillers. And with for whatever reason, I think that this is the writing and maybe some of the, I'm not a big Joe Esterhaus fan, even though he's, put up some great stuff. I love Basic Instinct, but it's like the only thing she cares about from the beginning is that he's innocent. And like that, she cannot fathom defending him if he is not. And I think from that moment forward, it's a little bit hard. uh it's very easy to root for her, but it's maybe hard to side with her because he is so obviously guilty. Like, he so obviously did it. Spoiler alert for the end of this 40-year-old movie.
Hmm.
That it sort of is a little incongruous because you kind of want to shake her and be like, girl, what are you doing? Why are you horseback
Hmm.
riding with this man? Even if
Yeah.
you know, just even if he was just a client and you weren't attracted to him and he wasn't 1985 Jeff Bridges, who could not be dreamier. Like, you forget he's so cute. Um,
Hmm.
but she's making some real tough decisions, real questionable decisions.
Yeah. Real, also very dated 80s
Yes.
decisions. Having said that, I do, yeah, we'll get into that, but I did just want to note I do weirdly enjoy the sort of slightly Hitchcockian tone that the film has. That's what Glenn has also described the film as, a bit of the throwback to Hitchcock. Not that this compares to Hitchcock necessarily, but the whole idea of like kind of second guessing maybe with each new revelation, that sort of thing, because
Hmm.
you're not really sure if the most obvious answer is the correct answer at certain points, or if there's something more complicated at play here, or it's just like, okay, this is just hiding in plain sight. But I can sort of sense in the script him being inspired by those like classic red herrings and just teasing enough information to, I would imagine, get an audience really worked up in the cinema watching it and gasping and just kind of being kept on their toes
Hmm.
in a way that's like great, fun, crowd pleaser. Probably best not to drill too deep into the themes and what it's actually saying. You know what I mean?
I agree, but I think part of the problem is that they don't really introduce any other possible suspects until like the last 15 minutes of the movie. And so it's hard to be like, well, who else could it be? There's nobody else. And he's maybe a little too sweet and smooth. Um,
Yeah, no, that's true.
so I do that part, but I do think it's hitting all the right notes of like, it's almost like I wish this is maybe more of a recent kind of way that movies go, of like, if we had known that he had done it from the beginning and seeing her fall
Yeah,
into his spell and into his trap and how she's going to figure it out. But I think that, like I said, I think that's more of a 2020 new millennium sort of way of handling this kind of film.
yeah, that is true. I think that's asking a lot of a movie from
Yes, I
1985.
agree.
But yes, I agree that that is probably a smarter approach ultimately in the end. I do kind of enjoy how we're presented with a lot of different men in the film outside of Jack who also throw up a lot of red flags as well. Like, even the district attorney, the Peter Coyote character, there's a point towards the beginning, of course, where like they're putting together the case and is like, okay, well, this is probably a clever way to stage all of this and get away with it. and then it's kind of a red flag when Krasny kind of like leans back in his chair and he's like, if I was gonna kill my wife, that's how I'd do it.
I wrote that down in my notes. I wish they'd pulled on that thread a little bit more, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
he's just like, and he's so irredeemably bad, Peter Coyote, you know,
Yeah.
which I think was probably fun for audiences in 1985. If, you know, if this was 85, right?
Yeah.
You know, like 3 years after E.T., where he's like the softest, gentlest man.
Right.
And now in this, he's sort of just like irredeemably bad and slimy from the start. So I wish that they had
Mm-hmm.
made him more of a suspect, probably.
Yeah. That would have been a very fun twist.
Um,
Um,
I'm sure
mm-hmm.
you're talking about the men of this movie. I'm sure you're going to bring this up. Robert
Mm-hmm.
Loggia, weirdest Oscar nomination of all time. I
I
mean,
I mean, we can talk about it here since we're here. Yeah,
he
so
was
he's playing
fun.
like her mentor-ish type she used to work with. He was a big investigator. Uh yeah, I think for him it's just like the vibes of like we just love this guy. We love this character actor
Yeah,
and the presence he brings on screen. He does not have an Oscar scene. It's not written in a way that would suggest an Oscar nomination, but here he is.
and,
Yeah.
and he's not. He's also like not jumping off the screen so growly. You know, he's kind of like doing the Robert Loggia thing, and I remember watching it previously and being like, "Oh yeah, this is so fun. He's so fun in this." And this time I watched it, I was like, "Wait, what does he even do in this movie?" And it does smack of the idea of like, well, he's getting they had no idea he was going to live for another 25 years or whatever. He's getting a little old. We've never honored him, and they had no idea Big was around the corner, because
Right.
that feels like you know, the encapsulation of what he did best in the latter half of his career. But
Yeah.
he just like he's just in it, sort of, you know.
Yeah.
That's it.
He's bringing his Robert Loggia thing to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're right. It's no different, I think, than many of his other roles, like Big. Maybe that would have been a better nomination, even.
And
Um,
the fact that he is nominated the same year as like Dom Amici wins this very, very career Oscar for an older
yeah.
man is kind of like, oh, you dipped into this well twice. You were already doing this thing with Dom, maybe. But
Yeah.
then again, I'm glad that Robert Loggia has an Oscar
Of course.
nomination, so good for
This
him.
is his only one.
Yeah,
Yeah, I know.
it's so weird.
Also this same year, for to continue the thread, like Geraldine Page is winning her kind of legacy Oscar in Best Actress.
we don't
So
have
that was
we
in the air.
certainly don't have time to talk
I
about
know.
Geraldine Page beating Whoopi Goldberg for what is possibly one of the 25 greatest on-screen performances of all time in The Color Purple. So,
Yes.
you know, my heart rate can't take that conversation. I'm not prepared
Okay.
for it.
Yes. Yes. Let's lower our blood pressure here, and just I want to circle back to Glenn's performance, and also the character name feels very like intentionally androgynous as
Of
well,
course.
in a very 80s-ish way, and again is commanding that power and respect, and she definitely has this kind of like serene, sort of cool confidence at times that I really like, and she rarely raises her voice. I just really like how, at least in the beginning, at least how it's established, she has that like detached, impartial quality, because she knows as an attorney to let the client do the talking, and she can sort of ask the right sort of probing questions, but she knows what to look for and how to build her case, even if he's lying to her. And I think that like slight withholding quality from Glenn is something she really specializes in. Like you know, even when they're first meeting and he's trying to get ahead of her questioning by saying like, I didn't kill my wife, the way that she's like, I didn't ask if you did, with that
Hmm.
like slightly amused look on her face. I love whenever she gets to do things like that.
Yeah, I wrote down in my notes, of course her name is Teddy, right? Like it's
Yes.
just, of course it is.
Of course it is.
I think that it's funny because, like, I do think that so much of her career or her persona, I should say, was defined by the 1-2 punch of Fatal Attraction and and Dangerous Liaisons, and then later Damages, that
Yeah.
I do think she gets this. She certainly has this reputation of being, and I hate this word to use for a woman, but steely. She's
Hmm.
just cold and removed. But if you look at the natural and like the roles that she had prior to this, and I think that this is such a even, the big chill, I think that this is the an interesting pivot point from that persona, which is like a little bit softer, sort of like mother, like mother
Earth
sweet,
Mother.
yeah,
Yes.
to kind of this sort of like steely cold persona that she, does so well. Um, because she does have a little bit of that, to your point, competence and reservedness in the courtroom scenes, and then she can play those so separately in the at home scenes with her kids, and
Right.
and a very, I would say, progressive divorced relationship with her ex-husband. They have the best,
Yeah.
maybe they're just like buddies.
Very
he's get
healthy.
he's
Yeah.
getting the kids out of the house so she can get laid. I mean, that's, really, you ex- I think it's a nuance that I wouldn't expect, because you would almost expect it to be like, oh, and she's like, this ball buster to her ex-husband, and they have a contentious relationship, and they seem like the best of friends.
Yeah.
It's almost jarring.
Yeah. It is very much like, oh, this is a slightly progressive look
Hmm.
at relationships in a movie that doesn't always
Yeah,
provide that.
she does have a very sweet, her scenes with her kids.
Hmm.
While like this is maybe not a movie that you really want kids around, and her son is played by Brandon Call, who would later be in Step by Step, the classic TGIF sitcom, um,
Yep.
and was Hobie on the first season of Baywatch. That's besides the point. But like, maybe there's like a scene too many, but she does have like this really great rapport with those kids, and this sort of sweetness that again we wouldn't see from her on screen for a while. I cited The Paper. It's she's not playing that role for a little while again, and it's really, really. I think it helps make her courtroom scenes that much more believable.
Yeah. I mean, this is a really tricky character, I can imagine, for her to really like get a three-dimensional view of who she is to different people, how she presents herself differently in these situations.
Yeah, because her deal is that she's used to be a prosecutor, right? And then
Yes.
because of the Henry Styles case that comes full circle in this in somewhat asinine ways in the plot.
Yeah.
But because of that case and sort of the Peter Coyote's
Shadiness,
fixing, yeah,
I guess.
shadiness, thank you,
Yeah. Yeah.
leaves to go and does corporate law, and then now is being enticed back in to take this
Yeah.
case. And in that first scene of them talking to her about the case and her being like, no, I don't want to. I'm, a corporate lawyer now. It made me feel like I'd watch a movie about this character being a corporate lawyer. I don't know why that seemed very interesting. She just seems like, in that sense, she seems so competent and not derailed you know, by her feelings for Jeff Bridges.
Yeah. Well, when Jeff Bridges walks into your life,
Well, what are you going to do?
you just become unmoored, I
Yeah.
guess. I don't know. But yes, also on that note, real quick, I read that she was also offered a sequel to Jagged Edge at one point, which obviously never got made, but I don't know. I don't know what that would have looked like.
I think it was supposed to be with her and Robert Lo. I think like Robert Loggia must have really popped.
Hmm.
But I think to that point, if you're like a scholar of pop culture, or you like love Glenn Close, or you like sort of like love movie stars,
Hmm.
I do think that some of my affection for this movie, even if I have conflicted feelings about it, come from the fact of what you said earlier, that this is her first starring role. It was a hit. There was talk of a sequel, and so there is something exciting about like thinking about it in this movie star era that she was in, of like about to be on this run of Oscar, of lead Oscar nominations, and now she's like opening a movie, and there's something that just makes me forgive some of the things about the movie, because I'm so glad for it to be part of her canon.
Right. Yeah, that is a very good point. You can hold those two things at once,
You
I
can hold
think.
two truths at once.
Just to do a little bit more standing for a little bit, I wrote down a scene that I love, which is when Teddy is confronting Krasny, when she tells him about like how she's taking on this case as Jack's lawyer, and she tells him she doesn't want any funny business in discovery, like the last time with the case you mentioned about Styles. And he kind of dismisses her. And the way that she says, "I'm going to nail you to the wall," I'm just like, let's fucking go. Like, we are locking in to the Glenn Close we all know and love.
Yeah, I think those are her best her best scenes, and I think the most compelling parts of the movie are actually not her and Jeff Bridges, who I think have perfectly fine chemistry, but maybe
Yeah,
it's like so ridiculous. But like her stuff with her and Peter Coyote, like
I like it. Yeah.
that's damages Glenn Close. That's like she is sick of
Mm-hmm.
his bullshit, and and
Yeah.
you do feel more that she wants to beat him than even
Mm-hmm.
like get Jeff Bridges off, no pun intended.
Yes, which she does say at one point, and I'm like, okay, well, I guess we're getting cute with the double entendres.
Mm,
Uh, but yeah, to circle back to the her being wooed by him with riding horses on his property. I mean, that's the point where it's like, Teddy, you're
I'm
better than this.
I'm sorry. So to anybody who hasn't seen this movie, there is a scene, and
Yes.
it's early on in their courtship slash her defending him for the brutal murder of his wife and maid, where they're horseback riding, but they are jumping over these fallen huge trees. No helmet, no anything, and it's so ridiculous that these two people are doing this because it's not like a it's you know a a pleasant jaunt down a trail, and you're kind of like rolling your eyes at this, oh my god, like can't believe they put in this scene. This is like, an intense, you would
Yeah.
need to be a professional horseback rider to do this. And it's just like part of their courtship that shouldn't be happening in the first place. That scene really took me out.
Yeah, it is just a straight up like Olympic equestrian event that they're going through.
Again, listeners, I cannot express to you how big these trees are that they're jumping over. They are massive.
Yeah, it's yeah, once you go through something like that, you just I guess you can't resist each other. Um
How did you feel about the all of the crux of her
mhm.
figuring things out being based on the typewriter, and then her stealing the typewriter and hiding it under her coat when she left?
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna get to that. Put a
Sorry.
pin in that actually,
Sure.
because I just want to continue with this thread of the horses and everything.
I could talk about these
Um,
horses forever, so keep going.
of course, but yeah, it's like she's too far gone now. She's laughing with him. She's like tossing her hair back. It's over, and they kiss. Uh, to this point, though, I did want to just say I feel like we needed at least one more scene, maybe, of them like connecting a bit on a deeper level to make it feel like this is like a natural progression that this would happen.
Yeah, I
You know what I
agree.
mean?
I think that they are. I think that they are depending a lot on, honestly, on Jeff Bridges sort of like, being so cute and irresistible.
Yeah.
And we already discussed that she has like this incredible relationship with her ex-husband, but you don't before she sort of like falls head over heels for Jeff Bridges in like a scene and a half, you don't get the sense that she's like particularly lonely or looking for a man or like horny. She's just a
Yeah.
single working woman. And I think in the 80s, maybe that was shorthand for, of course, she would fall in love with like her murderous client. But I was really surprised, and correct me if I'm wrong, to your point about
Mhm.
like needing it one more beat of that, or I don't really think that she ever has any, we shouldn't do this, you're my client, she
No,
just
she doesn't.
at all. And I think that
This is inappropriate. Yeah.
that would have helped with like, make it a little bit more forbidden, but how could you deny this attraction or whatever? That felt like it was missing. It was just like, well, of course, you're here and you're Jeff Bridges, and it's really that really interesting. And like, look, I'm not here to pass judgment on any single parent or single mother, but she does bring him back to her home
Hmm.
to be caught by their son. Again, of which her ex-husband is incredibly forgiving. But that
Super casual. Yeah.
seemed like those are like the lapses in judgment that I'm like,
Right.
Glenn can't almost can't pull off making that kind of bad like those kind of lapses in judgment because she plays so smart, but that was kind of wild too.
Yes. Maybe she's just book smart. Maybe she lacks all common sense. I don't know.
It would have been nice. I mean, this is a lot to ask from for a movie from the mid '80s by Joe Esterhaus, catching strays all over the place. Um,
Yeah.
it would be nice to have her have a friend and like get that beat, even a coworker,
Hmm.
get that beat of like, oh, Sally, it's been so long since I've been on a date. Anything to round her out a little bit.
I have perfect casting for the friend. Mary Kay Place.
Oh,
Her
so
pal from the Big Chill.
yeah,
Bring her back.
that's really honestly, any of her co-stars from The Big Chill.
Joe Beth.
Joe Beth. I was gonna say Ileana Douglas, but this is too early for her.
Yeah, a
Um,
little bit.
but like Mary Kay Place, just like, be like, girl, you've got to get out there,
Yeah.
something. And I think also it would have been great. Again, I think it's pretty clear that Jeff Bridges did it by lack of there being sort of any other suspect. But
Who's the alternative? Right.
yeah, but he also doesn't have like any edge to him or danger that's sort of like, I can't, oh my God, but I'm so attracted to you. It's sort of like, oh, well, you know, it just seems like he is what is in front of me. And
Yeah.
so let's do this. Speaking
Yeah,
of
that's true.
uh danger, I
Mm.
have never seen a movie where the title of the movie is said so much. They refer to this knife as jagged
Hmm.
every chance that they get. The wound was jagged, the knife was jagged, the like the suspects and witnesses are describing it as jagged. I've never used the word jagged before in my life, I don't think. And it is so almost to the point where it put a smile on my face because you didn't get more than like, a beat and a half without somebody being like, that knife was jagged. Guys, it was jagged. It had a
Had
jagged
a kind
edge.
of had a bit of a jagged
Yeah,
edge, wouldn't you say?
yeah.
Yeah. um, that reminds me. Somebody just replied to my post after I said I was watching this movie that in Death Becomes Her there is a poster behind Goldie Hawn that is like serrated edge, and it's like a
Well,
parody
that's funny.
poster of Jagged Edge.
That's funny.
Anyway, maybe we could have said serrated at one point. Maybe switch up the
Anything,
verbiage. Yeah.
anything other than jagged.
Yeah. Also, I mean, we don't have to dwell on it too much, but there is a sex scene in the film, which is pretty brief in the grand scheme of things, but that's where another rather unfortunate aspect of this shitty producer kind of comes into play because apparently Ransohoff really wanted to be on the set there to make sure she
Oh,
was getting it right and even suggested reshooting it. And he was quoted as saying this wild thing where he said he was going to be standing there on the set, quote, fucking her with my eyes.
yikes.
It's just really gross. And Glenn heard about that and became even more self conscious than she already was, and just like really demanded that he not be on set anymore. It's just
Yikes.
really, really disgusting 80s
Yeah.
bullshit that it just, ugh.
I mean, the credit to her to also, she was not yet the star that she would become. So to like then like
Yeah,
wield her power and
right. That's true.
advocate for herself, it's sort of obviously awful that she would have to in the first place. But
Yeah.
oh, that is gross. Although if you take the behind the scenes grossness out, again, it is evocative of a time where movies had sex scenes between two
Yeah.
movie stars, and it didn't feel like gratuitous or anything. It felt like part of the story. Of course, it's a courtroom thriller, so now's the time for the sex scene, and you're just like, okay,
Hmm.
it feels like, you know, it it just movies used to be sexy, and I do think this movie is sexy. It's like it can't really decide what it wants to be. Does it want to be a courtroom thriller drama? Does it want to be an erotic thriller? And I think some of
Yeah,
that sort of like doesn't work out. And I wished, obviously, I wish that it had been more of that kind of like erotic thriller, and there was a little bit more heat between them. But why I'm wild to think that this movie was directed by the guy who directed Return of the Jedi, right?
that is true.
I,
Just a few years removed. Yeah,
so strange.
directing Ewoks, not a few years earlier.
Right.
So I don't know. He had the range.
I mean, I know I already mentioned this, but like, I think my biggest, one of my bigger problems, and I guess this is
Hmm.
because of her feelings about the Harry Styles case, in which
Henry
they,
Styles,
and
not Harry Styles.
it was difficult every time I heard it.
I know.
The Henry Styles case where
Yep.
they, they essentially put the wrong man away, and she sort of knew it, and he died by
Hmm.
suicide. But her insistence that he was innocent and that he would tell her that he was innocent felt like. And then the scene in the parking garage where she figures, sort of like has this inkling that he did it, and she goes so far as to go to the judge and ask to be removed. She's like sort of unmoored by this, and then so easily convinced that that wasn't the case. She turns it around so quickly. Um,
Yeah.
it almost felt like the movie. They were like, "Oh, guys, we gotta start wrapping this up." So they just were like, "She thinks he did it. No, she didn't. Okay,
Yeah, I definitely felt that on this watch of being like she seems like done with him after a certain point. Like she's done which I think like that scene is a very effective moment, just kind of individually in a vacuum of her just being like, you played me so well," and all this stuff.
which
Um,
again would have been, I think, such a better twist for her 3/4 of the way through to figure out that he did, and then still have to
yes,
defend him.
right. That would have been great,
It
great
seems like we
tension.
could have
Yeah,
made a better version of this movie, Kevin.
yeah. We should have done a pass.
I know. I should have 4-year-old me and negative however old you were.
I was -5.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
we should have done a pass at this. I
Yes.
also didn't fully understand the end of this movie. I do wonder if it went through a few iterations, because so the ending of
Yeah.
the movie is that he comes in, they've pinned it on somebody else, this murder and the Henry Styles murders. And so Jeff Bridges comes in to her house in like the hidden, his face covered, same way he did in the beginning when he killed his wife and maid, and was to kill Glenn Close. Was his idea that they would just pin that murder too on the guy who wasn't even who was it just didn't make a lot of sense as to how he thought he
Yeah.
was going to get away with this murder.
I don't even know if it feels in character for him to do that, honestly. Oddly enough, like the idea that because it just feels very hasty and like emotion driven that he's just got to take care of her, but then like what's
Right.
next?
He's so methodical a killer that he, 18 months prior to killing his wife, assaulted this other woman so that there would be sort of like this other version of this murder that he could replicate
Hmm.
in killing his wife, and yet thought like, well, if I kill my lawyer who I was having an affair with, nobody will know. Nobody will piece that together. Seemed,
Yeah,
again, a little bit rushed because they needed a climax.
yeah. I mean, it's a well filmed climax, I will
Yes.
say. It just again not thinking too much about it, because like again like to that point they've won the case. He's not guilty. She's very much like girl who is going to be okay, and
Then she
and
finds
she
the typewriter.
and she finds a typewriter, which has been kind of breadcrumbs throughout the movie of like, oh, we've been getting these mysterious anonymous notes that are like extremely Like, who else could know this except for Jack? And they don't really piece that together for whatever reason. Or maybe Robert Loggia does, and he's kind of like, he's been kind of telling her from the beginning, like, it's probably him. And she's like, oh, no.
Yeah, I guess that's like a central problem with the movie is that like all the men have figured it out and she's like the last one to get it.
Yeah, it's hard to reconcile that, I suppose, with this being like a strong female character type of thing that it's trying to be at the same time. But yeah, the whole typewriter thing that you mentioned earlier with the weird T that's like specifically from 1942, which Robert Loggia also tells her about. That feels very like John Grisham before John Grisham for me.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know.
I don't mind it. Like it's not even a twist, like a revelation like that is so sort of specific, but it
Yeah.
is a little convenient, you know.
Yeah, it's a little cute.
Yeah, it's a little twee.
Sure. Yes, not how I expected this movie to be described, but sure. Yes. But I think sort of by the end, I think Glenn does, even if you're not loving some of the logic and like the way that this character is being presented, the physicality, I think, is believable in how she's really, by the end, really fearing for her life. And I should definitely bring a lot more of that in Fatal Attraction, some of the physicality of those more extreme scenes there as well. So I don't know. I think it's just like one of those things where in a vacuum and individually, I think she's pulling off a really good performance and showing a different side to her than audiences were used to seeing. It's just the logic of the character and the writing doesn't always vibe with her, and
Yeah. I don't know if it's our years of seeing her in other things, but I didn't find myself blaming Teddy.
yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm not like screaming at the
Yeah.
screen, girl, wake up. You know, it's
Yes.
sort of you can sort of know that like it's like a writing problem and not a Glenn problem. So that
Yeah.
I didn't find myself being like, oh, this character. You do root for her.
Yeah, I think so. So, yeah, by the end, she does, in fact, shoot him.
Take a
And
life. She's a murderer.
yeah, she did that. And it's interesting because there was also kind of a little bit of tension in the fact that apparently some audiences didn't really get like a great shot of the fact that it was, in fact, him.
Oh,
Like,
I remember the first time I watched it, I was like, that's him, right? It was not clear.
right.
That's interesting.
Yes. And there was this whole thing of like Gene Siskel back when he was doing his column. He got so many letters from people being like, so was that Jeff Bridges? Like a lot of people just didn't really know,
Oh, funny.
which is interesting.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I thought it was just me. I did not find it clear the first time I watched it. Because
Yeah.
also he does sort of look like the guy they pinned it on, whose name escapes me. They're sort of like, you know,
Yeah.
with just a ski mask pulled up, it could be him.
Right. I think Bobby Slade.
Oh, Bobby Slade, right. I remember that.
Yes.
His last
Another
name's
classic.
Slade. Yes.
Yes. Classic 80s name. Yeah. And also to speak to that, I think the scene where Bobby Slade like confronts her in the parking garage there, that's an effective moment again of just like teasing the menace of the men in this movie
Right.
at times. So
And that's a moment where she's like quick on her feet and really smart. He's like threatening her. She pushes, the horn and
the
doesn't
horn.
stop
Yep.
it.
Mm-hmm.
But then in the courtroom, he calls her a bitch on the stand. And
Mm-hmm.
nothing from the judge, nothing from anybody. She just
Yeah.
like kind of asks him to repeat it. I mean,
Like, yeah.
to his
Yeah.
downfall, of course.
And I think also to a credit to her performance is that her reaction to that isn't like any kind of like shock or anything. It's just like, oh, like I can use this.
Right. No,
I can
it
turn
is
this
a-
around.
I agree. I did put that in my notes. It is like a gotcha,
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's exactly
Yeah.
what I want. You can't quite tell actually if it's exactly what I wanted you to do, or like or great, I'm gonna lean into it. And she does play that.
Yeah.
She does play that like sprightliness in the courtroom scenes well.
Yes, for sure. So it's a bit of a common theme thus far with this show. The fact that some of these movies that Glenn is in this era of her career are not always the best, but that we also feel that she is largely innocent herself within the flaws of that. And I feel like this definitely is another entry into that after things like Garp or The Natural
Mm-hmm.
or Maxie, certainly. Worth
I agree.
noting.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
this is, I think, her first, it feels like a movie star performance.
for sure.
Yeah, and
Yes.
I love that.
And she will then transition into being a full leading lady star after this with Fatal Attraction, which is an interesting little double feature, this and Fatal Attraction. More
Yeah,
on
for
that next
sure.
week. Yes. But do you have any other kind of stray observations before we talk about the release of the film and the reception?
No, I already talked about how many times they said jagged in this movie. That's my big takeaway.
Yes. Yes. Well, to get to the release, it came out on October 4th, 1985, just a week after Maxie, by the way, the film we talked about last week. So, double dose of Glenn in the fall of 1985 for moviegoers. This one, thankfully, was actually a hit. It opened at number 2 that weekend behind Commando. So that's interesting. But it went on to gross $40 million in total. It was the number 22 film of the year. Big improvement over Maxie, which totally bombed. And the film, it got like mixed to positive reviews from critics. And for awards, Glenn was not nominated for anything, but as mentioned earlier, one of her co-stars was indeed nominated at the Oscars, Mr. Robert Loggia, in Best Supporting Actor. He had zero precursors leading up to it. There didn't really seem to be a lot of momentum, but it happened, and he was the one and only Oscar nomination for Jagged Edge. So, I mean, I will say this is it is a juicy part for Glenn, but she didn't get traction for it. Do we want to talk about maybe why it didn't quite feel like a nomination worthy kind of performance, maybe?
I do think in this era, these popcorn movies sometimes snuck in maybe a little bit more than they do now. So perhaps
Yeah.
it could have been, but I mean, I don't think that while a lot of the flaws that we are discussing about the movie are easy to say from a 2025 lens, I do think enough of them were probably glaring. The logic of the movie and of the character were probably glaring enough in 1985 for it not to gain traction, and this just sort of seen as a hit, a popcorn movie. We're happy it happened, and then moving on like a not really an awards play.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I also do think the fact that Robert Loggia did get in was partly just his career, but also for whatever reason, it is easier for that to happen in supporting compared to lead. And this is
Yeah,
like a wild comparison, but like when you think of like Barbie and like America Ferrera and Ryan Gosling, but not Margot Robbie, just it's like, with these sort of genre films, sometimes supporting is a little easier.
hmm. And I think also she was obviously a supporting actress nominee, but she hadn't cracked into that sort of like every
Right.
time lead actress. And this was maybe not the movie that was going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that
Yeah,
she can't get nominated for all of them, Kevin. You know what I mean?
I guess. Well, I mean, you brought up Meryl earlier, and so
That is true. And you know what?
she.
And I do sort of apologize for comparing the two because I'm sure they've been compared all their careers, and that's not a fair assessment. But that is, I think, in the context of the 80s, a kind of where it was.
Yes, and I mean, she even was kind of like asked about Meryl a little bit at the time as well, just from interviews, and she's talked about Meryl a few times. I do love. I don't know if you've seen this one shady interview with Glenn where some reporter was asking her on a red carpet about how like, oh, Meryl Streep said that like roles for older women are tough in Hollywood or something, and then Glenn just kind of like gives this thoughtful look and is like, She's never had any trouble getting a part.
Yeah, I mean, I would like, I I imagine that just the sheer nature, because they don't star in a film together until, or in a film together until the 90s, whatever that movie is that sort of like lost the time that I can't remember.
House
Um,
of the
House
Spirits.
of
How
the
could you forget?
Spirits, right. And that was like a moment, it wasn't a movie that
It
met the
was.
moment, but
Right.
just like on the awards trail, they spent an entire decade together,
I
on the
know.
awards trail. I did just look at because I couldn't conjure it to mind, but the 1985 Best Actress race is somewhat stacked.
Yeah.
I can see why there's no room in it. I, of course, as I said, I think on my previous podcast, have a lot of questions and issues with Jessica Lange's Oscar nominations and how boring they all are. But she was playing Patsy
Yeah.
Cline, so I guess I can see why maybe this wasn't a play for Glenn.
Yeah. As Patsy Cline lip syncing for her life in
Yes.
that movie. Um, yeah. So what else was there that year? There was
It was
Whoopi, there was Geraldine,
uh
Meryl, right?
and Anne Bancroft in Agnes of God, which was
Right, right, right.
well loved by the Academy. Meg Tilly got a nomination too, so it
Yes.
was tougher to beat to get into. But I also feel like I'm glad that she was starting to experience success that wasn't specific to awards attention, that it was like, well, this is my name above the title and we're gonna open to number two at the box office. I think that that's the reward here.
That's true. Yeah, that's a very good point. So, yeah, she, again, movie star, Glenn.
Yeah.
It's a very exciting moment. But let's get to our last segment here, where we are going to rate Glenn's performance on a very specific scale that I have devised in my twisted mind. So, thinking about her performance and where this sits in her career, would you say that her performance as Teddy Barnes is such that she's ready for her close up? Which is to say, one of her best performances, perhaps even Oscar worthy? Is it low Glenergy, not really one of your favorites? Or close but no cigar, somewhere in the middle?
I definitely think close but no cigar. Um, and
Yeah.
if like there was a scale, like maybe like one notch above that, because it is such a great movie star performance and it is so
Mm,
specific and important to her career, and she is quite good in it, but she kind of like, all that to say, she sort of can't overcome the lapses in logic and some of the writing problems, but I think it's an
yeah.
important movie for her.
Yeah, I will agree. Close but no cigar. This is pretty close to maybe getting ready for her close up, but not really quite there yet. She's inching towards that close up. It's
Yeah,
just the writing of the character. It's everything we talked about.
yeah, and I also think that it would be interesting in the context of her filmography. You know what I mean? Like perhaps at the end of all this, when you get through some of the tougher years, that
Hmm.
this will rise in some of that estimation.
That is true. That is true. And yeah, like you said, it's sort of like what we talked about, even like when I discussed something about Amelia a few episodes ago, where Glenn does project intelligence. And sometimes when her character makes a dumb choice, it is like, hmm, hmm,
Yeah,
yeah.
it
So
doesn't fit.
there's tension there. But yeah, she is giving it her best. And I also give her extra credit for being professional and making it through all the bullshit that she had to deal with people calling her ugly behind the scenes.
Wild.
So,
It's
yes,
crazy.
it's the 80s, but
It's
also it's unforgivable.
it's so I do sort of love that her response to that is to be in like two of the sexiest movies of all time, Fatal
Yeah,
Attraction and Dangerous Liaisons. Like that's kind of very cool.
it is. Absolutely. So, on that note, Eddie, thank you so much for joining me. I always love chatting with you. This was a very fun discussion, I must say.
Thank you for having me. I love discussing Glenn, and it's always fun to chat with you about movies.
Yeah. And this specific era, this like 85 to 90 is like your sweet
It
spot
sure
for
is.
me and you, I guess.
It sure it sure is.
Yes. Well, where can people find more of you on the internet?
You can follow me on whatever at Eddie, EDDIE _ MOURADIAN, and catch me whenever I pop up on Vulture, The Daily Beast, or Awards Watch, or Queerty, probably talking about the housewives or an actress of the 80s and 90s.
Yes, so things that this audience will probably like as well. So, yes, thank you all so much for listening. You could find me at Kevin_Jacobsen on Twitter and Instagram, just Kevin Jacobsen, no underscore on Blue Sky. You can also listen to my Oscar-themed podcast, And the Runner-Up Is, for coverage of every single Best Actress race. If you enjoyed my chat with Eddie here, I would suggest starting with 1990, where we had a lot of fun talking about all those actresses.
Make sure you have time.
Well, yes, that's a good warning. That's And the Runner-Up Is on all platforms. And to keep up with the world according to Glenn on social, follow The Glenn Pod on Twitter, Instagram, and Blue Sky. Rate, review, and follow on all podcast platforms. And with that, I will bid you all adieu.